Hey everyone, I know it's been a while since we've had a video, but September was the craziest month we've ever had. Like more events in September than any other month in the history of DJP. And so yeah, I've just got a lot going on. But yeah, back, got new videos coming. So because September was so good, I actually decided I was going to invest in another camera. And if you follow the channel much, you probably know that my go-to camera is the Sony PXW Z150. This camera has been amazing. I've got 3 of these. I often rent others when I need more. It's got very high quality image. You guys are looking at me through one right now. 4K, nice large 1-inch sensor. Just a very pleasing image overall. And I've been very happy with this. Connectivity's been pretty good for working with my trailer. And when I was considering buying a new camera, I was seriously considering getting another Z150 because they've worked really well. However, there's a few things that made me kind of hold off a bit. First of all, this camera is now 4.5 years old. This came out in April of 2016. That's when I got my first 2. I bought 2 of them right out of the gate. And in terms of Sony cameras, 4+ years is starting to get up there a little bit, and so I'm not 100% sure that there might not be another new model replacement coming in the next few months, maybe next spring, sometime around when NAB might be, or maybe next April or in October when NAB actually might really happen for real. So anyway, the price of these has come down quite a bit. When these first came out, they were $3,600. You can now pick them up for $3,000 regularly. If you shop around a little bit, you can get them for $2,700, which for what the camera is still a really good deal. So the question is, did I actually buy another Z150? And the answer is no, I did not. I actually went for something else. So instead of the Z150, I got a Sony PXW Z90. So why? Why did they get a different camera when I know I like that other one so much? Well, this actually offers a few things that are different. And sometimes it's nice to have some variations on a theme, on capabilities, to address the random situations you might come across. And the Sony PXW Z90 is considerably newer. It came out in 2018, late 2018, so about 2 years old instead of about 4.5 years old. And it added a couple capabilities on top of what the Z150 had that make it a really good possible upgrade / replacement / basically something that works in the same family, that work really well side by side. And so when I was debating between the two, it was really down to the Z90 and the Z150. So what are the differences? So they're very, very similar in a lot of ways. So they've got an extremely similar imager in them. The image sensor is very, very similar between the two. The lens between the two, I think, is actually identical. In terms of raw capabilities, they're very, very, very close. They're both 4K. They're both SCI outputs. Internal recording on dual SD cards. A lot of similarities between the two. There are a handful of differences, and most of them are in terms of usability. A couple things that I'm going to have to live with, and a couple things that I'm actually excited to have. So let's start with the ones that I'm excited to actually add. So first thing that this one adds that the Z150 did not have is phase detect autofocus. So the autofocus system in this camera is able to determine how out of focus a given pixel is, not just if it's out of focus. With the Z150, it has a contrast-based autofocus system, which works pretty well most of the time, but this new phase detect system that's on this one is much, much, much better. It's much better able to determine which direction it needs to go in order to go in focus. You know, with a contrast detect, it's hard for the camera to know whether it's focused in front of or behind the subject. With phase detect, it can tell that. There's a difference in the phase between adjacent pixels, essentially. And by measuring that difference, the camera is able to know I am out of focus, I am front focused, and I'm front focused by this much. So at that point, the camera doesn't have to necessarily try the different combinations in order to figure out what's going to actually be in focus. The phase detect systems actually know how far it needs to adjust in order to get in focus. So that's a huge upgrade that the Z90 actually offers over the 150. So that's actually probably the main reason I decided to get this one over getting another Z150 in order to add that phase detect autofocus, because it is really a game changer in a lot of ways. We mostly do rely on autofocus for the events that we're shooting, and so having good autofocus can really improve the quality of our events. I was thinking especially in terms of when we put a camera on a jib, and especially also because this camera is considerably smaller and lighter weight than the Z150. This would actually be very much at home placed on a jib. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that this adds. It also adds RTMP streaming, so you can stream directly to YouTube. I don't think I'm ever going to use that, but it's there just in case. The Z150 only could stream to Sony equipment, basically. So, alright, now in terms of other differences, things that I have to live with a little bit. Well, first of all, one of them is right up here. So, this one only has one adjustment ring on it. And because it only has one, you have to change the function with a switch. So if you want it to be focus, you set the switch to focus. If you want it to be a zoom, you set it to zoom. That's a little bit of a downgrade from the Z150. The Z150 actually has 3 separate rings, so it has a zoom, focus, and then it actually has a dedicated iris dial, which I use that one all of the time. It's really, really nice to be able to just grab a ring and adjust the iris on your camera, especially when you've got changing lighting conditions. So I'm definitely going to miss that. In terms of the zoom focus, I don't see that as much of a big deal. I'll probably just leave that on focus all the time. If I need to adjust zoom, I will just use the handled zoom on here, the rocker. Or, you know, for most events when we have the cameras on tripods, we're using separate zoom controllers anyway, and so it's very rare to actually use the zoom ring on the front of the camera there. What about iris? So this camera actually does allow you to adjust the iris, of course. It's just done a little bit differently. So allow the camera to actually turn on here. Remove the lens cap. Alright, so what you do, instead of using a ring on the front, you actually press the iris button that's here on the side, and then that highlights the iris setting, and then this little wheel on the front, it's a little hard to see, that actually will manually adjust the iris. So you still can do it, it's just you're doing it with a little tiny wheel instead of a nice big ring, a zoom ring. So that is a little bit of an adjustment there, and that same control is also used to control the gain, the shutter speed, and the white balance as well, so you can't guarantee that having this wheel is always going to always control the iris on the camera, because it varies. And if you happen to press this button, iris button, a second time when it's already in that mode, that switches over to auto, and we usually don't want to do that. So most of the time, yeah, probably just set it on iris, allow the little wheel there to adjust the iris, and then we do adjust gain sometimes too. So we have to make sure that I always have camera operators who understand how this one works as compared to having the dedicated ring on the front. There's some other differences too, obviously. I mean, it is smaller, so it makes it a little bit lighter weight. It also means that the battery capacity isn't anywhere near as good. The Z150, I've been able to get 6 hours out of a battery pretty regularly, pretty consistently. However, with this size battery on the Z90, that's probably only going to be good for maybe a little over 2 hours, and so you have to have lots of batteries on hand and remember to swap them out. Whereas on the Z150, we don't have a lot of events where we need to continuously shoot for 6 hours, and most of the time when we do, we can do AC power anyway, so not really a huge deal on that. The other problem this camera has as compared to my Z150, and I don't understand why Sony has had this limitation in their cameras, but if we go into the menu, and you guys aren't really going to be able to see this very well on camera, but if we go to the video out, and there is an option here for 24p output. Well, on my Z150, that option also allows for 30p output. And basically what this is saying is that the SDI port here on the back, it can either only do 60 frames per second or 24 frames per second. It can't do 30 frames per second, which is kind of a big deal for me because the majority of the events that we shoot in 30 frames. It's only like the concerts that we maybe shoot in 24, and maybe sporting events in 60. But we've had so few sporting events, especially this year, that I never shoot anything in 60. So everything I shoot here for the channel is actually in 30. So what you're watching right now is 30 frames per second. I use 30 frames per second a lot. So what I'm going to have to do is basically have the camera set to output 60 frames per second and then run it through a converter in order to drop that down to 30. There's another option too, and I may do a video on this here at some point. I found a little very inexpensive converter that will down convert 4K to 1080p. So at that point I could use the HDMI output on this. I have the HDMI output 4K at 30 frames per second, and then my little converter convert that down to 1080p at 30 frames per second. That would give me a true 30 frames per second and the 1080p that I need. But basically, this camera will not output 30 frames per second natively in HD and in 4K. It only outputs it on the HDMI port anyway, so there's no way to get 1080 2997 out of the SDI in this camera. So, not the end of the world. I've had to deal with that limitation on the older brother of this one, Sony PXW X70, which I have actually just to my left here. It's the one that we use for Stream Team mostly, and it has the same limitation. It won't do 30 frames per second on the SDI output either. So something you just kind of have to deal with. If you're shooting 4K, it maxes out at 30 frames per second, so it's fine. It's just the SDI output that's actually really a problem. So, but other than that, the two cameras are extremely similar. There's not a ton of differences between them. I've kind of summarized the bulk majority of them just here in this video. So, as mentioned, I have had a Sony PXW X70 for quite a while. It's exactly the same form factor. You wouldn't be able to tell the two cameras apart just looking at them. But there are some functional differences between them. First of all, the X70 didn't ship with 4K support out of the box. It was a paid upgrade that you had to add on later if you wanted to, and I do have that on mine. As you see on our Stream Team videos, we do shoot those in 4K on that camera. The other big one, and this is a big one for me, is this one does have the dedicated link input for zoom controller built right in. I don't have to go through an adapter cable on this like I do with my X70. So, but anyway, so yeah, I did get a brand new camera. Just picked it up, and I'm happy to add it to the family. It's going to fit in perfectly with my Z150s. The image quality on them is essentially identical. Usability, the menus are basically identical, just a handful of tiny little differences between them. And this one also has the nice option that it can be nice and small. If you remove the top handle and the front lens hood, most people would never even think that this was a professional level video camera. You can carry this around in public and no one will realize that you've got something that's very, very high quality. So anyway, just briefly, I did consider the NX80, which is in the same family as this. Ultimately, I decided not to go with that one, mostly because of the SDI output. I use SDI so much more than HDMI. If you watch the channel, you know I absolutely hate HDMI, so I use SDI whenever I possibly can. And the NX80, that was one of the big differences between them. I did also consider the AX700, which has the same imaging sensor, some differences in terms of recording capabilities. It doesn't have the XLR audio inputs. For what I do, that's typically not that big of a deal, so I probably could have gotten away with that. But again, HDMI only, no SDI. And anyway, so there it is. Sony PXW Z90V, technically. The newest camera in the DJP arsenal. And it's probably not going to be a main camera, to be honest. It's not going to be the first one that we grab. But it's definitely going to be one that we actually get to use. And it's one that I could substitute in place of a Z150 if one's acting up or whatever. So anyway, so there it is. If you guys have questions about this camera, or the Z150 for that matter, you can leave those in the comment section down below. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Try to do new video-related content about once a week. However, that varies based on how often we get busy and have other events going on and whatnot. So Also, please consider joining the channel as a member. There's a join button down below, and that will get you certain perks like easy early access to videos and some behind-the-scenes videos. We actually just posted a behind-the-scenes video for a virtual event that we did not too long ago, and yeah, you get to see how we actually did it. So we did a live stream for remote, all completely over Zoom, and we actually shot some behind-the-scenes footage, and that's available at the top tier, the $10 per month subscriber level there. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching, and have a great day.